Hey, good morning. How are you guys doing? I hope everyone's doing well. It's a Sunday morning, and I'm really excited to have you here for the Graphic Novel of the Month Club for September 2024. We've got a really swell book here for you. The book is Rare Flavors, and we are lucky enough to be joined by the writer and the artist, Ram V and Filipe Andrade. Did I get that right, Andrade?
Yeah, it's good.
Yes. Okay. I always worry about saying names. It's the worst. Hey, good morning to both of you guys. How you guys doing?
Yeah, good.
All good.
Yeah.
Actually evening here, so just winding down for the day, but it's nice to have a chat about good work and always nice to join Filipe on a conversation, and you, Brian.
Love it. You as well. This is your second time on the show, Ram.
It is.
So that's kind of fun. And I welcome you for the first time, Filipe.
Thank
So the question is always the same, and it's why comics? And comics are a difficult medium to work in. They require a lot of time, a lot of isolation, a lot of work, and they don't necessarily pay particularly well, necessarily. So what is it about the medium of comics that that thrills you, that excites you, that makes it the thing that you want to do? Whichever one of you would like to go first.
Filipe.
Go, Brian. Go. You.
To be honest, like I agree with everything you said in that they're an often difficult medium to work with. They can be quite isolated in terms of how you work, but I feel like comics has always had a certain sense of innocence, a certain sense of creative purity of purpose. You know, you don't worry about what's this budget going to be, or you don't worry about what are these 1,500 other people going to say when I write the script. It becomes quite a pure process of collaboration. Ideally just you and your artist, maybe your editors if they can really get you to agree with them. But I feel like that purity of purpose, that creative authenticity, is something that I still enjoy. I really appreciate as well, because when I'm making a comic, I'm not thinking about anything else, and I'm totally immersed in that process, and I love that a lot. There's also always been this sort of punk rock aesthetic about comics, in that it's very bootstraps. You know, all you need is pen and paper, maybe some staples, and you can technically just make a comic. And I love the idea that something that is that raw can still have so much emotional impact and can evoke a response and can still be art. And so that is something that has always been dear to me. And I imagine, 10 years down the line, hopefully when I'm doing a bunch of other things as well, comics will still hold that same place of creative purity in my heart.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with everything you just said there. Filipe, what's your response to the same question?
I agree with you guys both. For me personally, comics, it's like the merge of the two things that I like the most, is telling stories and drawing. Because I didn't grow up reading comics. Where I grew up, we didn't have much access to it. So my first...
Oh, lost him. There he is again. Well,
the Ballad for Sea Salt, something like that, from Corto Maltese. And that was when I first realized that the power of changing the size of the panels. And this for me was really intriguing from the very first moment. And since then, I've been in love with the comics, because you can play a lot with the medium. And it's probably like Ram said, is you don't need much to do it. So it's really about you and your imagination. Of course, on the downside, you have to be a little bit focused, and probably you'll be alone for a while you're doing it. But it's a mental process that if you take it well, it can be it can be really important for the personal point of view of how you see life, because you really have to be immersive with yourself and with the characters you develop in your work with. Even if we are working for commercial projects or just more personal projects, there is always comics is not an easy media because it takes your soul a little bit in order to achieve whatever you want to achieve.
Yeah.
So personally, is one of the medias that I like the most, and especially because you don't need much to do it. It's simple and it's concrete.
Yeah. No, I love that answer. I really love too the part about it being part of your soul, you know, because it seems to me that other media really kind of flatten out the creators on a certain level that comics just don't. Comics are all about the creator and what the individual creator's vision is. Yeah, it's my favorite medium in the whole wide world. Obviously, I own a comic book store, but
that makes sense.
yeah. Philippe, did you study comics in school? Did you no?
No, I did. When I started to do my own comics, I was about like 11 years old. And by the age of 12, I decided that I wanted to do this in life. But at the same time, I was doing my comics aside, my academic way. And I went to fine arts school in Lisbon for sculpture. So I was sculpting in stone and clay, and I was doing completely different stuff, but at the same time always pursuing this dream of mine. And after I finished school, I started to work as a professional really early in my age, actually. So that's been the path so far. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty exciting stuff to be able to. What comics were you working on when you were 12? Just your own characters?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, I was doing actually, because I didn't actually look up for comics when I was young. I was mimicking a little bit the power of the animation. So I was doing just a bunch of squares in a page, and I was doing a sequential of a character that was moving, going to an island. The island under he will build up a boat and then go out in a boat. Like a little bit of MacGyver. You remember MacGyver?
Sure.
So I was watching MacGyver. So it was always this character that I was drawing that he was in a problematic situation and he had to get out of there. So I have like maybe, I don't know, 20 pages of this that I was doing while I was young. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you? Were you going to do it as like a mini comic or something like that, or were you just doing it purely for yourself?
I was doing for myself because I wanted to tell that story, even though it was like it was just a natural instinct to do it. I thought I would go to animation studio or something like that when I was young, but there was not much options. So comics is always like I heard this before, I don't know from whom, but it's like the cinema for the poor people, you know, because you don't need much. So I was always I had these ideas and I was putting in graphically in a sequential art that is called comics.
Yeah. Ram, the one of the things that, and you can put him back on the pick, Ben. Thank you. One of the joys about your work is, I think, the kind of the scope of it. Every book that you've done has had a lot of world building around it and a lot of world. Do you think that that's something that works better in comics than in other things? Or do you even agree with the thing that I said to begin with?
I mean, I feel like I agree to an extent in that I only build as much world as I feel as is necessary to tell the story. I think largely my stories are driven by character, but um, I don't. I like the idea that my characters live in a world that responds to them and changes with them and grows with them as well. And so certainly with something like Rare Flavors, or even with Layla, I feel like the world building is almost historical rather than something that I'm doing for the purpose of the story. No, the characters are sitting in a world that is already familiar to me, so I'm not really building much. But there's always these sort of magic realist elements to it, like the crow or the ghost in Layla Star, or in this case, a potentially could be a cannibal but isn't really a demon walking through this world. And I feel like I love the idea that the world is a repository for these characters and their stories. And so as we see this story develop, the world is changing along with them. And so we see people change, we see the world respond, we see the characters become affected by the world around them. And I feel like that adds a lot of nuance, verisimilitude to your story. It feels like the story is real and something you are immersed in. And I think the most important thing that it does is it says there is a world that is bigger and larger outside of the pages of this book, that you can sense. Maybe you don't see it, but you can sense it. And I think that's very important, to have a sense of story and sense of how this story is grounded, if you will.
Yeah, no,
as to whether that's easier to do in comics, I think it's easier when you're working with someone like Philippe, largely because the way Philippe draws pictures, still images, is his still images aren't really still. They feel like they have so much life. And so the world doesn't feel like someone's just going around documenting buildings and, drawing every road as it is. It feels like everything is there for a reason, and everything is singing in some part of chorus that only you can hear when you read the comic. So
yeah, I would very much agree with that. And it's interesting, Philip, when you said that you had studied sculpture, because when I look at the art, thinking about that, I kind of can see that in the art, right? That the things I've read about sculpture is that you have your big block and then you're pulling out from the block, and I feel that in the art. Does that make sense? Or does that sound crazy?
No, not at all. Sculpting is a way of seeing life a little bit. Like comics is, you can see even the people that when they don't do comics, they have a comics mentality. It's the level of details. They like kind of sometimes like these low degree dialogues that they are really funny, or really with the right time, like a little bit of stand-up comedies, a little bit comics as well. In sculpture is no different. You start to look at the world a little bit through the light. So the light is the main thing, and because the shadows that the object you're looking at, it's much more interesting than just the object itself, because the lights change everything. So I remember when I went and start to sculpt the real thing, I started to drawing in a different way as well, because I like Rem was really nice to say about what he said about my work, and it's alive because I grew up with animation, so I always had these vivid things about trying to capture the motion of the body. I look up a lot for Japanese animation. They are the masters of it, and the sculpture gave me the stillness, the power of looking at it as a stillness, and at the same time build a story around it, even if it's just one drawing. So yeah, definitely changed my way of seeing the world and drawing itself as well.
Yeah, one of the things I often say about comics is that it's a matter of finding the perfect image, the perfect thing to show the idea that you're trying to do. And so it's kind of like an editing process to make the exactly the right moment to communicate the thing that you're saying. And it sounds to me from some of the things that you're saying that's a sort of a similar thing that's happening with sculpture, right? That you're trying to get the light to fall on it just right, essentially.
You need to work with it. It's
Yeah.
part of the sculpting. You need to put the light in the right spot, so it allows you to understand the volume, because we understand volume through shadows. And the shape for us, if the light is really strong, you don't see the shape. You don't see because there is no shadow. So yeah, it's comics is difficult in a way. What is I found more difficult to portray in comics is the middle things, because like for example, when you see a movie or like a feature with people, there is a lot of stuff that is in the middle process of something, like people getting angry. They don't get angry from one point to the other. So in comics, you need always to, not always, but you can play with it. But to show emotions, you need to exaggerate a little bit. But like working with Ram, he writes really sensitive words, so exaggeration doesn't make a lot of sense. So you need to play with the middle time between things. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying, but this project, for example, Red Flavors, allowed me to experience and experiment that a lot. The middle things in between expressions or final expressions or emotions as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Have Ram, when you're building a script, do you think about those kinds of things at all, or do you just trust your collaborator to do it?
I trust my collaborator, but I'm also a control freak. So I need to know that what I have works, at least in my head. And then obviously, whatever Philippe wants to do with it from there, I'm happy to. I'm not as much of a control freak once the work is out of my hands, right? I'm happy to be surprised. But to go back to something you said, you said comics is about distilling everything down to that one perfect image.
Yeah,
I would look at it maybe slightly differently. I would say comics is about distilling everything into two perfect images, because everything in a comic is about what you put next to each other.
Sure.
And this wonderful magical thing happens when you put two images next to each other, because the reader's looking at it and they're going, these two images are connected because, and they're filling that blank. You don't get to fill in that blank. And I feel like that's where the best kind of storytelling happens. And to connect that a little bit to what Philippe was saying, I think that kind of stuff works really well when you're trying to do really powerful emotions, but you're trying to understate them. So the less you state an emotion in storytelling, the more your reader is likely to fill in that gap and feel that emotion. So if your characters are sad, make them smile. If they're really angry, make them sit calmly. And usually when you do that, the reader knows what the internal emotion is, and so they internalize it because your characters are not demonstrating it. And Philippe is amazing at doing that. So, when there's a conversation, there's an argument in Rare Flavors, for example, and at the end of that argument, you feel like this friendship that has been built over a few issues is breaking apart. And then Ruben, the character, just kind of sips his coffee at the end of that. He shows no outward emotion. And I feel like that is harder to do than to do a character who kind of theatrically stands up and throws his, throws his toys out the pram. But yeah, I love doing that kind of stuff. And also to connect it to something Philippe said, the Japanese, especially manga storytelling, they're masters of that, putting two seemingly unconnected things next to each other and making you create all kinds of beautiful connections in your mind. So
yeah, I know. I very much agree that the juxtaposition of things is where a lot of the magic of comics comes. I always say the comics are the gutters, right? Like it's not that you see Lucy holding the football and Charlie Brown running. It's the space between those two things when she's pulled the football away that the audience is then going, here's what happened, right?
Yeah.
And the audience is the person who actually pulled the football away. It wasn't Lucy who pulled the football away, it's you, the reader, which is just that's an amazing tool. I think
and to be honest, like, it happens, I don't think people give enough credit, but it happens in almost every visual medium, even film and TV. Like, you show a bowl of soup and then you show a baby, okay, the baby's hungry. You show a bowl of soup and then you show a dead rat. Oh no, the bowl of soup is poisoned. But that connection only happens when you put these two images next to each other and you have no narrative and you're forcing the viewer or the reader to fill in that narrative. So I feel like there's a lot of commonality between a lot of the visual mediums that we tend to overlook because there's this kind of sensibility of comics and film or TV being against each other. Whereas I think it's more interesting to look at the commonalities between how all of these things work.
Sure. No, I agree with that. I just, I think that personally, the fact that the comics have a gutter, that there is that space between things, changes the way the audience thinks and reacts about it. Movies are very linear. Movies follow.
Yes.
There's
a certain amount of time that passes between two shots in a film. And that time is whatever time you spent watching it. Whereas you could have entire years pass between two panels in a comic book.
Yep. And to get to what both of you were talking about manga, it's very common in manga to have that kind of time passage be the thing that's actually moving the narrative forward. I always think of like sequences in Lone Wolf and Cub where they're sitting there, about to start fighting, and there'll be like a leaf slowly falling down, and that tells you that time is passing. Whereas if it was just the two swords people staring at each other, you wouldn't have that same sense of time or movement or engagement. I think it's something that the comics do exceptionally well. Now, this is not the first. The Red Flavors is not the first book you guys did together. You also did Many Deaths of Layla Starr. It was after you did Layla, did you then both of you think, "Oh my God, we've got to work together again"?
I remember the exact conversation because we were in New York at a Comic-Con and we literally pulled two chairs together at like a waiting area upstairs near where all the panels are. And we were just sitting there talking about stories and ideas. And, I mentioned the Rare Flavors thing to Philippe. And I also remember we talked about a story set in Portugal about a neighborhood in Portugal that we said we would do at some point. So I think it was born less out of a reaction to Layla Starr and more just out of like, we should just make more cool stuff together. And honestly, that's a good place for creative collaborations to happen, where you're not doing it because something you did was successful. You're doing it because you enjoyed the process of working with the other person.
Would you agree with that, Philippe?
Yeah, likewise. Actually, that conversation was in San Diego, but it's just
yeah. Okay.
Just a little
San Diego, New York, they all blur together anyway.
Because I remember I was in a shirt in maybe a short or something. Totally agree. Layla Starr was a changing moment in my career, and working in a project that brings vibes literature, like Ram's writes, and how he likes the we share the same values on what we enjoy in comics. Is that little things in between panels, the little details that tells the story, that is not written and is not drawn. So it's a really combination of the both of us. And I think both of projects, we're talking a little bit of Lila Star, breeds that energy. So I think we complement well in terms of, I complement well the words Ram is writing, and Ram's writing is complementing well as well the drawings that I'm making. So this is a really thin things in comics, because I did a lot of collaborations before. But this one gave me the, it's like a band. Ram uses this example sometimes, and I felt that I didn't know, I didn't need to look to him to know what to do. So even though we talk and we share our ideas and process throughout the comics and the creation of it, I think we don't need to talk about probably what sometimes you need to talk between artists and writers. We talk about other things that add values in the end to the experience of the reader. I think that's what we do well. Is we give an extra condiment without speaking about it to the project and to the experience of reading it.
So that's interesting. When you, because you were saying that you guys sort of talked out the story at, let's call it San Diego. How formed was that conversation? In other words, Ram, did you already know what the story was before you started writing it, or in that conversation you started picking up things that Philippe would want to draw or that he added to it, and that changed the story?
No, it's going to be really funny. Like, I had the premise for the story, but I didn't have the substance of it. And I mentioned it to Philippe, and Philippe was interested, but also I remember Philippe was just like skeptical in terms of like, this makes no sense. Why is there a demon? Why is he trying to make a documentary? What's going on? And I remember we had to have like a fairly involved conversation afterwards as I got closer to writing it, where and it goes back to what Philippe said in terms of like when we talk, I don't have to tell Philippe like, oh, this panel has to be this long or this character is standing over here. It has to be more about, okay, do you get the emotional drive behind this story? Do you understand why it works? So I remember very specifically going to Philippe and giving him an example. I said, there was a really an unfairly maligned movie called Don Juan DeMarco with Johnny Depp and Marlon Brando and Faye Dunaway in it. The equation between Johnny Depp and Marlon Brando in that film is somewhat similar to the equation between Ruben and Mo in Rare Flavors. And I mentioned that film to him. And I think Philippe went away. Maybe he saw the film. Maybe he did some research on it. He came back. He was like, okay, I think I understand now what this story is about. And so I'm excited to work on it. So I think when I pitched it to him in San Diego, it would have probably been like the weirdest 2-sentence, like, what is this? I have no idea what you're trying to tell me, kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I remember coming back to Portugal on the flight, and I was like, I just said yes to a project that I don't even understand what's going on. But I trusted Ram's vision about it, even though it was like a blurry vision, to say. But the little things, once it was getting constructed, I started to envision a little bit. But in the end, I feel this is a story that you couldn't write like in advance. I don't know. I'm not a writer, but it looks is something that the developing of the story helps you I mean, at least for me, drawing it was a little bit a different process from Lila Star. I was getting involved as I was doing it. It's like a dough, you know. It's like you make a dough, you put it in the fridge, it grows, and then you take off it a little bit. You know, it's like a process. It actually was. We did something like a culinary thing with a book.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think if there is such a thing as a distinction between my sort of work for hire stuff and my creator-owned stuff, my creator-owned stuff tends to be very much the kind of stories that are made in their telling. They're not plotty. They're not like, you know, and then this twist happens and this secret is revealed. Haha. They tend to be much more slice of life. They tend to be much more, let's look into the life of this person and what kind of character they are. And so those kind of stories, you really can't build them in advance.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that also because of the nature of work for hire versus creator-owned work? In other words, if you walk into DC with the idea for a Batman story, does it have to be very plot forward for them to process it properly?
I think it's very difficult for people to process something that is not plot forward. So you would have to be either trusting of your creator to a point where you're like, I trust you can tell a good story with this, which, to be honest, is what happens with a lot of authors. The longer they spend doing their work is at some point you trust that, okay, this person knows how to tell a good story.
Yeah.
Even so, because of the nature of work for hire, and it's not just DC, pretty much any company, film, TV, anywhere you would go, the problem is people have to talk about your story when you're not there. And so when you're not there and some executive has to be told what the story is, they need something to go on. And more often than not, that tends to be plot or premise. So you end up with these very high concept, plotty sort of, this is how it all works out. And sometimes, you know, you use that almost like a crutch to just so you can explain what you're trying to get at, where that's not the important bit. And so often you'll see the more artistic, non-plotty, the more emotional stuff is usually auteur work where a director comes. Like, I imagine if Scorsese goes in and says, I want to do a story about 4 retired sort of mobsters now trying to make their life, it doesn't much have a plot beyond it. I imagine you trust Scorsese to be able to tell a good story. So I think that becomes the primary difference in that, is that although there were people at Boom who had to greenlight a Rare Flavors, they greenlit it off of the premise and their trust of me as a creator. Whereas if I have to get an idea greenlit for a Batman book at DC, I imagine it has to go through a meeting where I have nothing to do with it. And so there needs to be something to go on. And I also think that the readerships are different for these books. I don't. I think there is a lot of crossover between people who read my superhero stuff and people who read the Rare Flavors, Layla Starr books. But I also imagine they read them for different reasons, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were large chunks of people who read one but not the other.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. It's, you know, it's curious to me actually in that you know, there's this relationship that happens between building your creator-owned audience and building your mainstream audience, right?
Yeah.
Where they feed each other in a really interesting way. You know, people will read a superhero book that you'll do and they'll go, oh, I've got to remember this guy's name, you know, and then they'll read your more auteur work, and it'll make them want more superhero work from you, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And also, like, I've seen it take on really, really interesting forms, especially with these 2 books that I've done with Philippe. These are the books that I most commonly get the response to where someone goes, oh yeah, I'm a big superhero person. I read a lot of, you know, Marvel, DC. I picked up this book. I loved it. I'm following your creator-owned work. And then they go, but this book is also great because my wife, who doesn't read any of my comics, or my sister, or my kid, who doesn't love reading any of my comics, I gave them this book and they loved this book. So that's what I mean by there's clearly an audience that doesn't read both, but still finds attraction to these works, because I think they're more relatable, certainly in a lot of ways, to people. Whether, like, someone messaged me on one of my social media platforms the other day saying they were Michelin star chef and they read this book and they bought 2 copies for everyone in their kitchen. And I was like, that brought me so much more joy than any sort of award kind of thing would bring. It's stuff like that that really thrills me, to where, oh, I affected someone's life and they weren't necessarily someone who was always going to pick up this book and read it, you know?
Yeah. That's really interesting too. Did you do any research or anything on sort of chef culture, or did you just kind of pick it up from seeing Anthony Bourdain talk or something?
I mean, yeah, yes, Anthony Bourdain was a great chef, but I think if you look at his documentaries, they're more about the human condition and their relationship to food,
Absolutely.
rather than sort of any technique or technical aspect of cooking food. So there was that I picked up from watching Bourdain's documentaries. And then I also have had a general fascination with food and communication. I think food is the first language. And as a writer, I'm very obsessed with language. But you can, I used to travel before I wrote comics. I was a chemical engineer. I used to travel a lot for work. And I would travel to countries where I didn't speak a word of the language, but just watching how someone makes dinner, invites guests, shares their dinner, who sits at the dinner table, do they eat out of the same plate? Do they eat out of separate plates? What is the etiquette? Do you talk, not talk when you're eating the food? All of that tells you so much more about a person's culture, background, where they come from, than any amount of sort of question and answer research could. So
Sure.
a lot of my research is from my travels. And then the quirky part of it, of course, comes from watching Chef's Table on Netflix way too much. So
Right. Philippe, I'm curious in terms of drawing a comic that is so centered around food, when you don't have access to the senses that I think that most of us would associate with food, smell and taste. Was that a challenge at all for how or what to focus on?
Yeah, definitely, because Rem was sharing with us, I totally agree that food isn't really about just the food that we digest. It's about the emotion and the family sense around it. And just to give a little story to you, after I finished Rare Flavors, I went to Sri Lanka for vacations. And I was loving the food there. And I was loving especially one kind of pancake that is called roti. And I was loving it so much that I had to know how to do it, and we didn't speak the same language, but the guy that I went for 5 days in a row eating the same stuff, he understood that I enjoyed it a lot. So it was like inviting me because he understood that I wanted to cook. I told him I in English, but he didn't speak really good English. But I said, when you prepare this, I want to see how you make it. Is possible? And after a while, he understood a little bit with the help of somebody else. And I've seen how they did it, and they were doing it with so much love. And they were so happy to share because they were surprised by my curiosity, probably, because for them this is really regular basic stuff. It's almost like bread for us in Europe. So that tells me the little details that is food is all about. Food is all about what is surrounding it, It's for me at least. I see food like that. And of course, I know a lot of food chefs, non-chefs. I know shows as well because I always loved everything that is behind the world of the cuisine. And working on this was just an opportunity to express that love that I have with the things that surround this food. So the smell, you get it from whatever you bump into it. You know, even you don't see it. It's like an arrow to your memory. You know, it's like so straight. It's so fast that it's like always surprising it. You know, and working on it was really an opportunity to it's not hard, it's not easy to make it sexy in a way, but I found it really kind of easy because it in the end it was natural to show the things that I dearly love as well, you know. So wasn't hard, was kind of easy and surprisingly easy for me, but easy because I have this huge respect for everything that surrounds food, and even in my family, I grew up in a small. Grew up. No, my grandfather is from there, and we were going there 5 times a year. And there is really a specific food from that region in Portugal. It's close to Spain. It's really around the pork. So they kill the pork and they make all they can because there is no. How you say it, there is they use everything from the pork. So in the last there is one meal that is with the stomach of the pork with a really low and non-important meat, and they put it's like a big chorizo. It goes near the fire pit, and it's get drying by the flavor of the fire pit. And when it's ready, 6 months after, is a big fest because it's like the second ceremony after you kill the pork, you kill the pig, and you range the pig and all that. In that moment, when it goes to it cooks for, I don't know, 7 hours, something like that, in the same fire pit. It usually is better in the same fire pit because of the smell is the same. Yeah. And when they open it in cross, it's like a napalm wave of incredible flavors that are even better than what you're looking at, because what you're looking at, it looks like a slaughter, you know, it's not really pleasant, but it's so good, that smell, that I always save that in my mind as something that is really tangible from my childhood with my family and with my grandfather that is not alive anymore. So this memory for me is like so deep that this was an opportunity to show a little bit these little things that I love a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah, just that description got me salivating a little bit. Honestly. So let's talk maybe a little bit about the pitch to the publisher. Did you have to do a very formal pitch for Rare Flavors, or because of Layla's Star, they knew that you guys could do a good book, and as long as they understood sort of the outside of it, they were just go ahead and do it?
Rare Flavors actually has a very strange story in terms of its pitch. I had already started talking about Rare Flavors while we were working on Layla Star, but not as a comic. It was originally presented as an idea for a TV show. I was working with a TV production house, and they had said, "You have any ideas? Let's talk about it." And they loved Rare Flavors, and they were like, "Okay, great. We're going to take this. We're going to turn it into a show, but we want you to do it as a comic first, so that we've got like a thing as well to be like, look, this is what the story is." And at that point, we went to Boom, and we were like, "Look, we'd love to do this as my next book." And I said, "I'd love to work with Philippe on it." Meanwhile, at the TV studio, it had gone high enough to where someone went, I don't want to do a show about eating people. And someone at the very top of it said that. And so they came back and went like, look, we all love this, but it's not going to go forward. At which point Boom said, hey, you know what? We would still love to turn this into a book. And so I was like, yeah, why not? You know, I've got the story. I love it. So let's turn it into a book. And then that was the time around which Philippe and I had the conversation at San Diego. And so it all kind of fell into place from there. So the pitch was made, but not to Boom, but Boom knew of it. So they came up and they said, let's do this.
Yeah. And so did you need to do like a formal pitch document to Boom, or were they were enough on board at that point that it was just, we trust you?
No, yeah. So the original pitch just happened over a Zoom call. And then they were like, look, we already want to do this. We love this idea. So I was working with Derek, and I think the only document that I created before we just sat down and started scripting was I sent him an outline as to what each issue was going to have, which was also very sort of loose because I had no idea what some of the issues were going to do. I just knew that it's going to be about this food. It's weird now to think back on it because it was almost created like you might create a menu where you go like, look, this is a flavor profile. My starter has to be this, my main course has to be this, and then it has to have a sort of good palate cleanser, and then the dessert has to feel this way. So almost I knew what food items were going to be in the issues before I knew what exact story was going to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And in terms of developing it to get to the script, were you guys talking out the story or the elements of it, or was it just you, Ram, just going full bore?
I kind of knew the bigger picture sort of emotional drives of the book. I knew that it had to be this relationship between Ruben and Mo that was driving most of it. I knew it had to be their sort of pasts and their histories that they were trying to overcome. But I do remember very specifically there were issues in the middle, and the middle's usually the stuff that you don't have when you start out. At least I don't have when I start out with a book, because I know where my book begins and I know how it has to end, but I don't have the middle. And I remember this conversation I had with Philippe about this. There's a story of a young man who is in India running a tandoor, but he travels abroad and he has aspirations of, having a successful life, and he's got a 6-figure salary, etc. And there's a moment where he cooks food in his home in an oven while he's in the States, but he cooks it with such sincerity and authenticity that it reminds him of home, and suddenly like the world makes sense to him. I remember that part came out in conversation as I explained to Philippe what I wanted to do, and Philippe was like, yeah, I can see it working in this way, and then we do these 2 sequences, and then the microwave oven goes off, and so we have a ding moment in the page as well. So stuff like the details of how the story happens on the page certainly comes out in conversation, but at least in terms of the emotional content of everything, I kind of had a sense of where the story was going.
Yeah. Are you writing a full script in terms of like everything that's happening on the page, or is it just kind of beats and letting Felipe figure out what then happens?
No, it's all full script. Much to my detriment at times, but there's an awful lot of detail. But none of it is prescriptive detail.
Sure.
Like I don't write in the script like, oh, this character needs to stand here and then this light comes from here. What I write in the descriptions are meant to be emotional. Like, this is how these characters are feeling, or this is how this moment feels in the book. And I think that is more important to get across, certainly to an artist like Philippe, who doesn't need me to tell him what to draw. He needs me to tell him how the drawing should feel. And so, yeah, I do write full script, but it's not a prescriptive thing.
No. So when you get a script, Philippe, what's your process in breaking it down, in doing the thumbnails and sort of establishing the scene?
It's usually I break down in terms of timing per page, and then I start to feel that if it works with the vibe that I had when I read it. But usually it's not really about those thumbnails and stuff like that. It's really about the final conversation with Ram before I start to endorse the real drawing and stuff like that. Because it's I can add some panels, I can take out some panels, but I want to talk that with Ram because he has a personal vision about it, and I have as well. But I want to combine both. I think, and I feel that he does it too. So usually my work, this in technical stuff, is like a breakdown in terms of how many panels per page. I have my layouts already the same, with little differences, but I don't want to use a lot of tricks. I want this bande dessinée, a little bit of vibe, like white framing surrounding it. So we have the perfect timing of each panel. Sometimes I use this idea is broken, but usually I tend to follow it until the end, and I just break it here and there just to give the sense that it's like a plastic and it's not like I'm not
Sure.
constraining myself in it. But it's really about the moments. Like this story has a lot of inception in a way, and those inceptions I wanted to feel it, to make it feel part of the story as well. And this is a little bit tricky in terms of layouting because I don't want to use tricks. And I think actually in the final result, I'm really happy. But again, it was a mix of my layouting with the communication we had during the process.
Yeah. Are you how often are you talking during the production of an individual issue?
Maybe like twice or maximum of 3 times between issues, something like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will have like a doubt on something particular and I don't know how to do it, and I talk with Ram and he gives me his idea. I will try to put it and to implement it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's not, so another talk. It's a little bit like that. It's a process. It's a culinary.
Also, like, it's really funny the things that artists will get hung up on. Like you would just go, well, just draw it this way, and they go, no, it doesn't work. And there's no explanation for why it doesn't work, but I can understand because it doesn't work to how you want to see the panel.
Yeah.
And so you have to come up with other solutions to how to solve it. And so I think those conversations actually are really joyful for me, because like the way I wrote Layla Starr is very different from the way I wrote Rare Flavors, because I understand now what Philippe's motivations are when he starts drawing a page. So Rare Flavors is now written in a way where I'm aware of those motivations. And then whatever we do next will be written in a way where I'm even more aware of those motivations. And so, but also, like, you want to challenge yourself. So like I put recipes in this book for that reason of like, can I tell a story where the story is like blatantly interrupted by data essentially and still feel like it has emotional poignancy to it? And so, maybe the next thing we do will have something wild and crazy like that, because you want to keep challenging. We have a great friendship, but you want to keep challenging the collaborative relationship in terms of like, okay, where's our next album? Where's our sound going to go? And so I think that's the most exciting aspect of the collaborative process, rather than the sort of here's how many panels need to be on the page, or like this is what needs to be in this panel. Yeah, you do run into those, but they're usually very easy conversations to have.
Yeah, there's I was going to mention that there is probably more tell in this comic than there is show than in a normal comic. You know, I think the recipes are a really good example of that. But there's 3 or 4 other places where you're relating things, but you're not actually showing it happening.
Right.
And so that was a conscious decision then.
Yes, 100%. I think people confuse what show and tell really means. When someone's advice is, the ideal advice is you show, you don't tell. What that means is that you transmit to your reader / your viewer the experience of something happening, rather than telling them that it happened, because telling them lacks any kind of emotional weight with it. But that doesn't mean you can't tell a piece of the story, because Ruben writing a letter to someone who he hasn't seen but is very fond of, and writing a letter to them in a way that obviously he's a person who doesn't really show his emotions, but they filter through into his writing. And, he might be writing about, the stars and how the sky seems empty without them. But what he's really writing about is, I don't have a friend who understands my motivations. And because even in telling, technically, because it's a letter, I'm still transmitting the feeling of loneliness, the feeling of feeling like I don't have a friend. That is still, in my opinion, that is still show, not tell. Because you're being given the experience of something rather than me telling. Telling would be if I said, and then Ruben felt sad because Mo wasn't around. And so I think comic books are a literary form. And I know there are a lot of people who feel like there is a distinction to be made between a visual form and a literary form. And I don't necessarily think that exists. I think the beauty of the comics medium, if I could just show a bunch of characters walking around, having conversations and doing things, then what is the difference between a film and a comic? You can't write letters in a film. You can't have recipes interrupting your filmmaking process in still images. Maybe you can, but it would be an avant-garde film at that point. But you can do that in a comic, because a comic is still words and pictures on a page. And I feel like that kind of writing, that kind of letter writing, caption writing, almost expositional bits, but they're not really exposition, because they're still adding to your experience of the story without being prescriptive, without being just data being vomited at you. So I think there's a fine line there. But that was, entirely a intentional process.
And is your ability to do this and comfort with doing this dependent on having a collaborator like Philippe that that you trust and that is going to do it in the right way, versus, if you were writing some superhero comic, and I don't mean to use superhero comics in that way, but if you were working for someone who you didn't necessarily know who or what they wanted to do.
Yes, I think there is nothing as heartbreaking as working with a collaborator who is exceptional, but you know them from their work, and then you work with them and they're not quite on the same wavelength as you. And so it becomes difficult to transmit things that are not contained within the script. And it's even more heartbreaking when a collaborator is like, "Oh, I don't want to talk. I just want the script." And there are people who work like that. But in my experience, regardless of whether it's a superhero comic or not, like I'll give you examples of the positive side of things. Certainly working with Philippe, but also working with someone like a Mike Perkins on Swamp Thing, or working with Jason Sean Alexander on the Detective Comics part. These are people who want to communicate, who want the back and forth, who want less to know how many panels there need to be, but more like, what is he feeling? What is why is he saying this, you know? And I think that kind of collaboration always feels like it creates something special for me. Whereas the more sort of, okay, you finished your script, go away now, I will make some pages, always feels a little bit reductive to the process. Like it doesn't excite me as much as working the other way does.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that very much. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Felipe? Just in terms of the emotional thing and how it leads you to draw?
Yeah, but, because I was listening to Rem, and I was thinking a little bit that he writes like somebody that draws as well. And I know the work of the guys that he said. I would say maybe even Kegel the same.
Yeah.
That we kind of draw in a way that we write at the same time. So we understand the juxtaposition of the both things. So when this works, when you find somebody that wants to share and the same values on what you're building, it's much more easier than when you don't share the same values. It can work, but it's not going to be the same. It's like I'm not saying that is a frozen pizza, but it can be like you know, not flavored enough food, let's say. But it can feed you, but probably your soul will be like, I could have better food or something like that. So
it's similar to what you said, Philippe, with like making the food with love. You can
yeah,
tell when you can make the same food from the same recipe, but if you make it with love, it has a little bit of magic to it. Which
it's the extra condiment.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Do you, Ram? You don't draw at all, do you?
I do. I did 2 pages of a backup story. I love doing this because it comes across as so obnoxious. But I tell people like my first published work for hire gig was a Batman short story. And then my first published work for hire art was in the back of Detective. I did 2 pages as a backup story. But I do draw. I don't draw professionally. If I drew professionally, I would be a nervous wreck because it stresses me out to no end. But I can draw, yeah.
Yeah. Does that change the way that you write? Like, do you ever do your own thumbnails just to see, like, is this working? You know, or do you just
100%? And
Okay.
I think it happened a couple of times with Philippe as well, where there's a way to do a panel that maybe sometimes Philippe doesn't see. He's like, I don't understand how you're wanting me to put all of this. I don't think it works. And then sometimes I'll do a terrible sketch on my iPhone and be like, this is what I mean. And Philippe will look at it and go, okay, maybe I don't do that, but I see what you're trying to do, which is super helpful. With someone like Mike on Swamp Thing, like I remember we had these huge title spreads in the book where the title spreads had really intricate, weird paneling. And those were largely, a lot of them, born out of me sending like sketch of like, this is how I see the panels fitting next to each other. So I think even if you had no ability to draw, it's very useful as a writer, certainly in comics, to know how the page is going to look, at least in your head. Because if nothing else, I think it keeps you from making terrible mistakes. Like saying that, you know, and the hero jumps out of the helicopter and lands on the ground in the same panel. That's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, but a number of times I've seen established sort of writers from other mediums come in and just write that into a panel. And I look at it and go, you should try to draw this. And you will realize what you've written in 1 page actually is going to need 3 pages because you've not split these up in moments, which you need to do. So stuff like that, I think is really useful to work out and do layouts yourself. So I do layouts of my own. I mean, I have pretty much pages lying around with scribbles on them all the time. So
I find that fascinating because it's pretty rare, I would say, of the people that I've interviewed, at least, which is not necessarily, you know, a full sampling size, but yeah, most people are like, no, I'm the word guy. I have no confidence in my ability to draw, and so I won't even try. You know.
Well, I think it shows. Like, so I'm a big fan of Jonathan Hickman's work.
Yeah.
And you can see his past as a designer
Yeah.
is present in every comic book he does, whether he is doing the design or not, whether he's drawing it or not. And so I think it is always evident when a writer knows how to draw, and you can see it in their comics. Like Alan Moore could draw, Grant Morrison could draw, Donny Cates could draw. So I think you can see the ability to draw in someone's work, and it comes across, especially, I think, and I hope this is true of my books, but the books that I make with Philippe should feel and look and read nothing like the books that I make with Evan, or they should read nothing like the books that I make with Mike, because when I'm writing those scripts, I am writing with some understanding of what Philippe's approach to drawing is, and that understanding is born from me trying to draw as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Philippe, when you're working on getting the layouts ready and making the book work, do you work a page at a time, or do you work at looking at both pages so that you know how the flow is going to be?
Yeah, not in both pages. I do the whole thing. I do thumbnails a little bit like this. This is the book that I use to. This is like the little thumbnails that I do.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. This is for Red Flavors. Initially, ideas for the main cover. It's a little bit. You can see, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like this idea was the beginning of it. So I tend to do like a little bit of this kind of doodles.
Mm-hmm.
And from there I always do pencils, all pencils, because of Raccord. I don't want to change things, or in the last minute there is no mirror in the back, and in other shots there is a mirror. You know, this kind of mistake helps you out, and to give the same values throughout the comic, so you understand better the whole thing, because the comic has the rhythm as well. So I do pencil layouts, pencils, inks, and colors, always like that, from each issue. And sometimes I redraw pages here and there. It's kind of rare, but sometimes I have to do it as well, just to respect the rhythm and the flow of the story.
Yeah, when you're working on at least on a creator-owned book where you know where your pagination is going to go, how much are you actually, and how much are both of you thinking about the page turn on the right hand side as a critical thing?
Yeah, you need to think about it. It's part of the job, because there is time when you turn on the page. There is time in there, so you can play with it. You have to acknowledge these little things from the media, so you understand how to shape it. So it's completely different. For example, there is this sequence in Sin City. There is like 2 pages black, and there's just a little word just before you turn on the page. So this is the power of the perception of the language. You read from the left to the right. So he wants, just a really simple example, he wants to be all black, and then you find the little word, and you want to know what is on the other side of the page. So I feel we have a lot in Rare Flavors of this kind of moments in Lila Star as well, but I think we have more here on Red Flavors. So, and that's actually, for me, to draw is a thrill, you know, because you can really enjoy that moment. And when you put all the pages aside, you already know the rhythm, because even though you're not reading in a folio,
Yeah.
you know how it works. You know, it's cool. It's cool to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, page turn is absolutely important. Like as a writer, your job, you know, aside from the choice of what words you're putting on the page, your job is to work to the structure of the medium, and comics medium works in 2-page lengths, and so always have two things in mind when I work on my scripts: is people are going to view things 2 pages at a time, and then they're not going to know what's on the other side of the page before the page turn. And so everything you write is based on that, predicated on that idea. So if there's something I don't want the reader to know, and I'm writing the page on the left-hand side, I will actually try to write more into the page on the right-hand side so that I can put the stuff that I don't want them to know on the page turn. And so that affects my choices. And then I will go so far as to put notes in my scripts asking my editors on the non-creator owned work to be like, no advertisements between these 2 pages, please. Thank you. And so,
And how often do they listen to that?
usually they will, yeah, because they
Sure.
see the point of why that's happening and why that exists in the story. I mean, I don't ask for it 10 times a script, but you know, once in every 2 or 3 issues, I'll be like, can we not disrupt this sequence of pages? And they will listen to it. And I think that's super important. Otherwise, I mean, that's the joy of the comics medium, is the page turn, the splash, the double page spreads, and the sort of almost, there's a rhythm to how you end your right hand side page, because you're
Sure.
really laying up, if you're really laying up a big swing on the next page, there's a rhythm to how you end your right hand side page, and that needs to be thought about.
But that's, you know, it's a challenge, particularly on the more mainstreamy comics with ads, because
Yeah.
you know, sometimes you just don't have the say in it. I've read many a comic that got ruined. Not ruined. Ruined is too wrong of a word, but
You've got the big layup, and then
right.
the next thing is like they're trying to sell you some Hot Wheels rather
Exactly.
than
Exactly.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. So for similar reasons, like I tend to pick my battles, but I will occasionally go like, guys, can we not interrupt this page? And they listen to it more often than not. So
Yeah. That's really good. The lettering here is very nice. Who did it? It's by Andworld Design. Is that
it's Darren Bennett. So Andworld is Darren's sort of company, but it's lettered by Darren Bennett. Yeah, and who did Layla Star as well. Fantastic job on both. I think, especially with the recipes. We had a challenge for Darren in that I said the recipes have to feel like they're still part of the same book, but they have to distinctly be written like they're not the comic. Otherwise, you're going to be confused in terms of, is this someone talking, or is this part of the recipe? And so to have that challenge, I think he did tremendously in that case.
Yeah, I do too. I also thought that the particular font that he chose really went well with your art, Felipe. I would have, you know, if I hadn't known, I might have thought that you had lettered it yourself. Honestly, you know, I thought it really matched the quality of the line work.
Yeah, he knows how to draw as well with the lettering. You can tell that he understands, especially one thing that can ruin a lot the drawing and the feeling of reading a comic is when you see the balloons tip go crossing in a weird way, or placing it out in a not good you know, like not properly. And I didn't have any complain with it, you know, like and for me that's always the thing that I really watch out carefully, because it can ruin. Even when I see bad lettering, usually is about the placing of the balloon, and now in the space in the balloon and the lettering, and here it's fluid, so it's hard, because I heard this in France last week promoting the book, that somebody was saying that red flavor is like an onion. You peel and you peel, and it's always more to peel. And Darren's work here is another level of peeling, you know, of the aspect of the whole construction that is red flavors.
Yeah, no, it's particularly interesting to me because, you know, when I look at a lot of the sort of the mainstream book publishers who are working on graphic novels and things that weren't serialized, but a lot of times they're using these fonts which are really just too thick and too bold for the work itself, you know, and it really takes you out of the reading of it, whereas this really kept you in. Did he do the foreign editions as well? Did he do that French edition behind you?
I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure.
So. But
I'm
they
pretty sure
respect it.
Urban. Yeah. But
so
I know from experience also that Urban will reach out to a letterer and be like, "Can I have the font that you used?" Just so that we maintain that stylistic integrity.
Yeah, exactly. It's the work is kept kind of the same. I can show you a little bit. Like
yeah, I love that edition too. Yes.
It's kind of the same.
Yeah.
It's
got very much a similar quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very nice. That French book is a nice looking book. That big one. I sometimes I wish we were in France rather than America. Sometimes, not very often though. How about the coloring? You did the coloring yourself, Philippe? Yeah. What's the process for you of doing the coloring? Is that easier, harder? I imagine it's probably easier since it's your own art. You know how you want the lighting to hit things.
It's for me. It's much easier because I imagine it in coloring while I'm sketching and inking. So when you're working with a colorist, if you build up a confidence enough, so you build up a team work in a way, probably you will achieve the same thing that I achieve. When I'm drawing just a line, I know the color is going to have, so I know that I don't need a lot of details to show in the line process, because I can add those details in coloring. And color here, as in food, it's really appealing to the eye, so it's really, really important. I'm thinking about this image of the sea of the pepper situation. The lines are really not spectacular in a way, but the color and the vibrancy of the red color with the blue sky of that region in India, it's something that you can't explain it with the lines, you know. It's just really color process. So for me, it's the only thing that is difficult is really about the burning the eyes afterwards, you know, like it's a long process. It's a lot of details, and even though I have the help of Inês Amaro separating the colors, flattening out the pages, it's like sometimes but it's a joy. What am I saying? Is for me, it's one of the best things, because you can play. For example, you can use just this red throughout the comic, and it's just a little game that once you read the book in 3 or 4 times, you'll discover another level of little things that gives you the process of the story. and you process as well as a reader in a different way. Because I did it for me, you know, like being really egocentric here, of course, respecting the story, but these little things I do it so I enjoy the process of coloring as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love the mostly muted palette. And you're using a lot of color choices that are not necessarily intuitive, but they really support the work. I thought it was a very nice job. When you who is the hell is calling me? Do not call me. I'm on the phone. Thanks. When you're so we were talking earlier, actually this might have been before we were on camera, but how everything you're doing is you're drawing physically, it's all physical. Is the coloring, are you doing the coloring physically as well, or are you doing that on computer?
No, so there's a big difference here between the covers and the interior art.
Yeah.
The interior art is on computer, but the covers are made by hand. So it's Ecoline with watercolor and gouache and a colored pencil. So it's a mixed media thing. I would love to do that in the book, but I don't think that the book would actually, this will be an upgrade to the book. I think the digital color actually translates better what we are trying to do. So
I want to do a book with Philippe where Philippe paints the entire thing.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get him to do a painted book with me since the middle of Layla Star somewhere. So
yeah. It's a different game. It's a different game.
Yeah. It is, yeah. What? Just out of curiosity, roughly how long does it take you to pencil an issue?
It's really hard for me to do this kind.
That's why I said rough. I don't.
I would say like it's a week for each part.
Okay. Wow, that's fast.
A week and a half maybe for penciling, a week and a half for inking, and a week and a half for coloring. So
wow. So you're doing like 3-4 pages a day.
Yeah, because that's the process. I'm not separating the process. So it's I'm working in a factory in a way, you know, like I'm working just with chicken, cutting the chicken, and then I'm just seasoning the chicken, and then I'm just putting the chicken in the oven, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, again, it's a little bit like a cuisine works, but for me, is much better because I don't lose the strength of and the capacity that once in a while I'm not even commanding my hand; it goes by itself. Yeah.
I mean, there is a similar thing to be said for flow in writing as well. Like sometimes I will write the entire script with just dialogue, no descriptions, no paneling, but I'll write the dialogue from beginning to end, and then I will go in and then split it up into panels. And then I'll go back and write the descriptions for each of the panels. So I think I think what Philippe is getting at is there's an energy to penciling, there's an energy to inking. And if you keep switching back and forth, you're starting from ground zero each time. And I think there's a joy to the way Philippe, correct me if I'm wrong, when you pencil your fourth page is very different from the way you're penciling your first page. So yeah.
Even the timing, and sometimes, for example, when you start, sometimes you can't really. It's boring the first drawing, and then you start, like clay. You start to play with the lines, and you start to getting loose. And throughout the pages, you start to getting faster, but not faster to achieve a deadline. Faster because it's the rhythm of the pencil, you know, like go boom, 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 boom. It's like much faster. And I'm sure, like you do as an example, when you write, the level of energy when you interrupt to get that again, sometimes you lose it.
Yeah.
And it's gone. So you need to really pay attention to these little details. I think it works much better. I know people that work final page to final page to final page. They really believe in the layout section for the production. But I think when you doing each part, there is a vivid moment for it. There is a moment where you're flying. Like when I'm saying that the lines go almost for itself. It's true. I don't command. After a while, it's just like it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. The last thing I'd just like to ask you guys about in terms of the craft is what was the editing process like? I would get the feeling from listening to you guys talk that it was probably pretty low key, that the editors did not go, we need a lot of changes, we need a lot of things to be moved around, because they trust where you're at. And it sounds like as a creative team, you're really gelled in a good way. Would that be accurate, or were there changes that editorial wanted to have made?
I mean, in this case, certainly for the writing, it was more a case of proofing rather than actually having story notes or anything.
Yep.
Actually, Eric Harburn is probably one of the editors I respect the most in terms of his ability to edit story. I have gotten 1 or 2 story notes in the past from Eric that I had not already thought about. So to me, that's always very exciting when an editor's coming from an angle that you haven't considered before. But certainly with this book, it was maybe a few line notes here and there in terms of word choices, maybe. But beyond that, nothing for me. And from what I saw on the art as well, like maybe there were factual things like, oh, this person is wearing this in this panel. But there was nothing in terms of like notes on layouts or notes on how the book had been drawn.
Yeah, likewise for me. Yeah, likewise for me. It's actually kind of rare when, and Eric is one of those guys, the notes he gives makes you think in a good way, not like, look at these guys giving me these notes, the arm and this and that. It's nothing regarding these aspects. He is really understanding the process from both of us, I believe. Nice. And so he's like just giving a little, just what do you think if, and this is really important from an editor point of view, because challenges you to have a bird's eye view of everything. So because you know he's there for you, but at the same time he's always these notes gives you that intention to remind yourself to see the thing from an eagle point of view.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Isn't always, but it's absolutely the way it should be. All right, so what's next for the two of you? You guys are working on the next story already, or taking a break? What we'd love to know.
I need to have some room to breathe, but I certainly intend to get back to. I think we were going to catch up in New York anyway, so. We talked about 3 stories, and I love the idea that 2 of them were set in India, but the third one I would love to set it in Portugal. And so it maintains that sense of like, this is about where we come from, this is about where we're from. So yeah, hopefully we get around to that. But the past few years for me have been a bit crazy in terms of the amount of work, and I'm still in the process of figuring out how to do less but more interesting work. And as soon as there's some room to breathe, I love the story we talked about for this third book. So I would love to get back to it sooner rather than later.
Yes, but it's the same. It's the same. Now is the time to promote. And experience rare flavors. The next project will arrive sooner than later, I'm sure. But for now, I'm really, 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 really happy with what we've produced.
Oh, you should be.
What is giving to the people as well, And I'm focusing on that. And of course, I have my personal projects as well. But for now, I'm really focusing on this.
Yeah, no, makes sense, and it's a great book. It is something that we were very very happy to make the book of the month. I think it's
Thank you.
strong, it's powerful, and yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, well, so then the last question, much like the first, it's the same. This is a series of interviews. We've been doing this for 10 years now, 2 clubs a month. And so a lot of people watch this who want to make their own comics, but are, they're not sure of themselves. They don't think they're good enough. They don't think their ideas are smart enough, et cetera, et cetera. So if there was a piece of advice that you could give to a want-to-be creator of how to make comics, what might that be? And it can be something physical and tangible. It can be something philosophical. It can be something emotional. But I would love to hear your answers of what you might recommend to someone.
I mean, from a writing perspective, I'll just go off of what you mentioned. The thing that separates someone who eventually is a professional and someone who stays an amateur is exactly that. It doesn't matter if you're not sure of yourself. It doesn't matter if you don't think your idea is great. It doesn't matter. What matters is you sit down and you write long enough to get to finish something. Whether it's any good or not is the second question. The first question is, did you write it? Did you finish it? Mm-hmm. And then for the second question, I'm going to steal from Ray Bradbury, whose advice I love. He said, he was asked once, how does one become a good writer? And he went, well, you start out by writing a short story every week, and then you write it for a whole year. And then I don't know any writer who can write 52 bad short stories. So there you have it. And I think people love this, to perpetuate this idea of things being magical. It's like, oh, I was inspired and I wrote this and it was beautiful. Whereas the truth of it is, like, almost any professional I know who has written anything of any value, of any beauty, has written 10 times those things of stuff that hasn't worked, that doesn't feel right, and that probably should stay hidden in a drawer for years. But the act of sitting down and writing every day, and writing for yourself, not so something will get published, not for somebody else's property. I think that's also very important. Is, don't get me wrong, I do a lot of work for hire stuff now, but the motivation of where my stories come from is always personal. Even when I'm writing like a Batman story, I'm still thinking of what is personally important for me to say. And that only comes if you develop a process of expressing yourself on a regular basis, whether that is for publication and for money, or whether that is just something you're putting down on a piece of paper for yourself.
I love that answer. I think that's a great answer. Philippe, can we get the same from you? What would be your piece of advice?
Yeah, it was really interesting what Ram said about writing every week. In the end, after a year, it's impossible to not have writing something good. But I think there is, I'm not saying as an advice, I'm saying from my own experience. If you love what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with it. If it's professional level or not, if you love it, while you love it, probably you'll get to that point, because somebody will see your drawings either on your social media or through friends or whatever, So don't focus on getting the work published, I would believe. I would rather focusing on having joy while doing it, because you'll need it. It's the most important thing, because everything the rest is a production scheme. So you have to have a lot of internal things to work well. So you have to be resilient, you have to be resistant in a lot of ways. Like being a little bit alone and by yourself. But just to finish this, sometimes you step up into little things that changes your perspective on things. So I was going to Paris, I believe, on the floor in Paris airport in Charles de Gaulle, I believe. I found this little piece of paper. It looked to me was a comic book written and drawn by an Italian kid. And the book that was 4 pages and 4 panels each page. And the story was about the loneliness that the son felt by being just by himself. And throughout the comic is the search of another friend by the son. And this is written in a childish way, but it was so pure, and the drawings were so imperfect but beautiful that I saved that piece of paper and I wanted to portrait it, you know, just to remind me how simple things needs to be. And in the end, was a kid with 7-year-old. So, and that was an instant piece of advice, you know, like just focusing on whatever you want to express and believe in that process, because in the end, the son found another son. So he had a new friend. So I believe is that poetic moment of giving your inner self a moment of joy.
I loved that story. I think that is my favorite answer to this question that I have received in 10 years now. I really liked that. Yeah, that is goddamn beautiful, guys. Wow. Cool. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time and sitting with us today and talking about making comics and craft and all the things you do. It's really good stuff. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Yeah. Give me 2 minutes to do a little bit of bookkeeping here. Hello. Hi, you sitting at home. You're sitting there and you're like, I would like to read a good book. I you know, it's hard to find good stuff sometimes. Rare flavors. It really is a rare flavor. Boy, that's kind of a hokey thing to say, but it really is. It is a beautiful book. It is well thought out. It has got a lot of heart. It's got a lot of thought into it. It's fantastic. You should be buying this book. You can get it from the library if you need to. If you want to buy a copy, you can buy one from us. There's a button, a link, there's a thing. You'll also, if you get it from us, you'll get a really cool signed bookplate by the two of them, which is comes from Europe and made it to America. So that's really awesome. And you'll be really happy with it. So do that. Get this book. You'll be very pleased with that. I have a couple thank yous I want to make. I want to thank first and foremost, I want to thank my staff, Zoe, Kat, Katie, Max, and Chrissy. If I did not have such a great staff, I certainly couldn't sit here in front of a camera and get to talk to creators about making stuff. You know, they do all the work in the store and they do a great job, and I couldn't do anything without them. I want to thank Ben for running the show today, doing the camera stuff. Again, I would not want to sit here and try and do that myself. I want to thank Jordan, my producer, who does a bunch of stuff that nobody sees, backstage stuff, but it wouldn't happen. I want to thank all the people who are watching the show every other week. I want to thank the people who are the members of the club. Every single month, you'll get a fantastic book like this. I think it's a pretty cool deal. And most. Well, yeah. I'll conclude. Do that conclusion in a minute. Let me tell you what's coming up the next couple of shows, though. Before I forget that, the next show that we're doing is the Kids Club. We're talking to Lawrence Lindell for Buckle Up. This is a really smart and fantastic book. The kids are really gonna like this. Next month's Adult Club, about a month from today, is Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick Horvath, which is a scary good book. This is really good. So look out for those shows. And then the last thank you I have to make is I want to thank writers and artists who make things like Ram and Philippe here. If it weren't for you guys, I would be sitting in a store full of blank pages. And I am really, really glad that I live in a world where I can sit in a store full of beautiful, magical comics like this, and that I wake up every day and I think I get to go to work and I get to sell people dreams. And I literally couldn't do it without you. So thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for doing that, for being the conscientious creators that you are, for coming up with such beautiful work. Just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Again, thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and we'll see everybody next month. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.